My name is Gana Naveed, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you today to this live session at the 15th edition of School of Tomorrow events for Setting the Stage for Tomorrow's School. In order to formally start today's event, we would like to thank UBL for its continued support for School of Tomorrow over the past many years. Once again, UBL is our main sponsor for the 15th edition. Other sponsors include My Backpack, MK Books, Paramount Books, and PTCL. Lastly, we also thank Google and the Google team who are here with us today as partners and speakers. I would like to introduce our prestigious moderator for today. We have with us Ms. Aisha Kasuri. Ms. Aisha Kasuri is a career educationist with a demonstrated history in experiential education, research, management, coaching, leadership, and team building spanning the US and Pakistan. She has played a key role in developing TNS Beaconhouse, Newlands, Leo's Workshop in Pakistan, and the Reggio Treehouse brand in the US. Her professional expertise focuses on alternative education model, PBL, Montessori, and the Reggio Emilia, and she believes a critical part of learning for all is play. Ms. Kasuri is also a trained IB professional across the continent. She serves on the Board of Governors for TNS Beaconhouse and has been a member of the Chief Minister of Punjab Special Ed Committee. Our honorable panelists for today are Mr. Rosen Bosch, Ms. Susie Bost, Mr. Rayan Khalid, Ms. Risham Najim, and Mr. Kasim Kasuri. Thank you.
Thank you so much. At this point, can I have the rest of our panelists please come join me on stage? Thank you. Welcome to those who are online. I'm just going to get to you in 1 second. I know, hi Rosen. I can't see Susie, but I'm sure she is up. Oh, I can see her now. All right. We are going to start our session. We have Rayan Khalid, who's a student of ours. And most of us are teachers, so we know how students are tardy, right? So we'll decide what to do with him when he gets here, but we really want him to be part of our panel. But I will start now. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Assalamu alaikum to all those who are watching online. Already the session has been explained by our moderator. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with our panel and introduce our panel to you. Today we will be talking about setting the stage for tomorrow's schools. And our panelists are, of course, to my left, I have Mr. Kasim Kasuri. He is the CEO of Beaconhouse School System and also the chair of the SOT conference that we're at today. Excited to have you, Kasim. Thank you for being on this panel. We also have Miss Susie Boss. She's right there on our screen, as you can see up there. Ms. Boss is an education author and a consultant from the US. She's worked with teachers and schools globally on project-based learning initiatives. Thank you for joining us online, Susie. We appreciate it. To my left on the stage, I also have Ms. Risham Najam. She's the director of LGS and focuses on curriculum and pedagogy. She recently joined the board of the Citizens Archive of Pakistan, which curates the National History Museum. It's a very exciting place. If you haven't had a chance to go there, please do so. We have with us also Ms. Bosch. Ms. Rosen Bosch is the founder and creative director in Rosen Bosch Studio, located in Copenhagen and Madrid. The studio is an interdisciplinary practice for art, architecture, and design. Rosen is best known for transforming education globally, using design as a strategic tool. Rosen is also joining us online, as you guys can see up there. Before we start, at the end of the session, we will have 15 minutes to answer any questions that you may have. So please do jot down any notes that you need to, and we will make sure that we get your questions right at the end. Rayan Khalid, our student who's supposed to be with us, he's a DP2 student who goes to BCP Gulberg. He is interested in business, and he loves to talk about entrepreneurship, and he watches TED Talks in his spare time. Hopefully, he's not watching a TED Talk, and he'll join us very soon. So let's begin. I'm going to ask Mr. Kasim to begin with a small presentation that will guide the rest of our dialogue today.
Hello. Ji, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome once again. So, I mentioned yesterday at the opening session of the SOT that the SOT conference series has over the years helped us to shape the direction of the organization and to make much needed shifts and changes, because there is I guess there's a grave responsibility that we bear, which is to provide the best possible environment to the guardians of the future. So in that context, in 2005, at the School of Tomorrow conference, which was actually in Lahore, I think at the Pearl Continental, it was called Towards 2035 School of Tomorrow. And we had got speakers, a lot of visionaries to come in from all over the world. And how does this thing work? Where am I supposed to point it exactly?
Just Azam, thank you so much.
Yeah. So Azam, I'll just talk and you can kind of move the thing, because clearly I can't point it at the SMD. That will not help very much. So in 2005, we had our first official School of Tomorrow event, at which we invited speakers from various parts of the world. At that event, we spoke about the state of education, including in our own schools. At Beaconhouse, we felt that we needed to look at education system which was more experiential, more project-based, more child-led. So these were basically after like 2 days of deliberation, these were some of the key things that we concluded. Some of the key speakers who were part of that event, who actually helped us reach that conclusion, were none other than Noam Chomsky and Dr. Roger Schank, and a number of other people who were present on the occasion. So we came up with this new school. The working name of the school was the New School, because it did not have a name. And then it ended up becoming TNS. So I just want to tell you a little bit about TNS, which is actually kind of partly the inspiration behind this particular session of the SOT also. So TNS started in 2007, a couple of years after the first SOT conference in 2005. There were a number of people involved in the conceptualization. We decided at that point that we would make Reggio Emilia. Some of you may have heard of this Italian approach to learning, not quite as well known globally as Montessori. So Reggio Emilia basically views every child as a unique human being and believes that learning should be child-led, and that children have the right to direct their own learning, and believes strongly in the role of the environment, the teacher, the parent, and the child himself as being key drivers in their education. So Reggio Emilia and then project-based learning. So these were the two approaches that we identified way back in 2007. So that's how TNS started. There was a lot of idealism at the beginning. We felt that there should be no exams. We felt that learning should be purely experiential. We felt that you should not be teaching only through subjects, because when you learn mathematics in an abstract manner, you don't necessarily understand what the real life application of different concepts might be, as opposed to, let's say, having to create a project in which you have to calculate. Let's say you have to carpet the stage, you need to multiply the length and the width, and so for younger children, it's a better way of understanding the concept. So project-based learning, Reggio Emilia, these were the starting points of TNS. We can move on. Um, and once we reached the upper primary, we realized that even though we felt that examinations were not the best way of assessing learning, but in the real world, some kind of examination systems was required. So we therefore concluded that the International Baccalaureate, the IB, was best aligned with what we were trying to achieve. And so we applied to the International Baccalaureate, became a candidate school for the middle years program. The IB middle years program is from year 6 to 10. Bit confusing. Sometimes people equate it to O level, but O level, as we know in Pakistan, is 9, 10, 11. The middle years program starts in year 6 and culminates in year 10. So the IB MYP, the school was authorized for that. We then, I think in 2011, we moved to, we did not move to, but we opened a new campus because TNS had originally started in Gulberg. We opened a campus in DHA. A lot of the senior kids moved over there. And so experiential learning and project-based learning in Reggio Emilia, especially in the early years, remain the ethos of TNS. But then we felt that, okay, over the years, perhaps due to, let's say a lot of considerations, we were maybe not as cutting edge as we would originally have imagined or wanted to be. And we decided that we wanted to innovate again. So we came up with this new concept, the working name of which is TNS 2.0. Hopefully that will not be the actual name of the school, but given our track record, it might actually end up being called that. Since TNS was never meant to be called TNS, that was just the working name also. So TNS 2.0, so okay, we're running. I'm talking a bit faster than the presentation, which is fine. You can just keep clicking. TNS 2.0 is a school which is presently under construction. It was meant to have opened by now and is inshallah opening by spring of 2023 in a few months. So the picture you see in the background is actually the school, so we can just leave it at here for now. And this is a school which actually does not have any classrooms. So it's a slightly, I know sounds a bit crazy, but we have learning villages and where students get together. There are different kind of spaces for students to interact, and it changes according to the age group of the kids. We've also had to innovate in terms of the pedagogical approach, because we felt that even in terms of project-based learning, we had to reinvent our understanding or at least our execution of project-based learning. So I will wrap up now because the rest of it I think should be taken on by our very able architect. So we were able to identify an architect in Denmark, Roseanne Bosch, who has been able to join us today. She's there on the right-hand side. And so together with Roseanne, we conceptualized the school. Luckily, Roseanne has her career or her focus is on futuristic schools. And so between our team and Roseanne's team, we've developed this new school, which we'll be talking a little bit more about today. But hopefully we can, I'm not trying to suggest that what we are trying to do or what Beaconhouse is trying to do is the only direction when it comes to schools of tomorrow. But it's certainly the one that we are, let's say, most familiar with. So Aisha, I'll hand over to you. You can now take it over from here.
Thank you, Kasim, for that presentation. Rosen, it's a great segue, so we're going to go right into talking to you. The first question I wanted to ask you, and I've done a little bit of research and seen the schools that you've created all over the world. They're dynamic looking, they're gorgeous. But I wanted to ask you, what's wrong with the schools that we already have?
Thank you. Hello, Kasim. It's so nice to see you. And I'm so sorry I cannot be with you in Pakistan. it would have been yeah, a delight. Well, what's wrong with the schools? What first of all is wrong with schools is that they are designed as a result of an idea of how to organize or maybe also control in a little bit a group of people. So a typical school, a traditional school, yeah, has a layout which actually, and this is a bit worrying, resembles a lot the layout of a prison. You have a lot of small rooms and a corridor which access to this room. So what you see when you're an architect and you look at the layout of a school, you know, is that they're made for efficiency of a certain system. The system is that you have 30 people, one person in one room, one to one particular activity. Now, in the meanwhile, science tells us and that we actually learn in a very different way. So when we started to look at, okay, how to maximize the learning potential of a human being, and then to think of how can the physical environment help to maximize this learning potential, you end up in a very different layout. So the layout of a school is not really made to enhance your learning potential as a human being. It's more made as a practical solution for managing the time of the teacher, managing the time of the students, making sure that you know that they have 1 hour of mathematics in this particular location. It's also managed to how to say so, to control in a way not only the activity of the people, not only the time spent of the people, but also their physical movement. Typically in a school, you don't only sit in a classroom, you also sit on a chair, so you have a kind of a physical framework which dictates your bodily movements. Now, this also has an impact on your learning potential. The fact is that we think that sitting still on a chair is the best way to learn, but it actually is not. Just recently, actually yesterday, I read another investigation that tells us that our creativity is enhanced when we combine it with short breaks of movement. So again, you know, a building, a school building, the architecture of the building, the interior design of a typical school is just simply not made for learning.
Thank you, Rosen. I'll circle back to you. I have a couple of follow-up questions. I'll just circle back to you after a while. Risham, I would like to ask you a few things as well. I wanted to talk about, I asked what's wrong with the schools we have today, and I wanted to ask you what's wrong with the classrooms we have today.
So, hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, I think that, I think in education, we're constantly looking at the future, right? We're preparing, and one of my favorite quotes about education and the future is the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I think as educators, we hold a lot of that responsibility of creation in our hands. And in order to do it well, I think we have to look at who are our students today, right? I mean, as Rosen said, the schools that were, created in the 1800s, they were trying to create a certain type of student, mostly factory workers, a lot of followers, people who could follow directions correctly. But let's look at the students we have coming into classrooms today. And what is our end goal for them? If employability is one of them, and it very much is. I mean, bread and butter is very, earning bread and butter is very critical to most people. Let's look at the jobs that students today will hold in the future. Well, most of the jobs students today are going to hold in the future haven't been invented yet. So how do you teach to that? If we were to look at what the World Education Forum looks at as some of the fundamental skills that employees will have in the future, one of them is creativity, originality, taking initiative, curiosity, adaptability, and the ability to communicate and negotiate. So when today's student is coming into the classroom, what do they already hold in their hands? Schools today are no longer, teachers are no longer gatekeepers of information, right? Children are exposed to all types of information. They have it at their fingertips. So they're not getting information just from the hours of 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. They have access to information anytime. They don't wait for it. They go to it. And so it's funny. There's an anecdote about a child who saw the initials BC after a date, and he thought it stood for before computers, because that's what, children today can't even imagine a world without technology at their fingertips. Yeah. So I think, children they're already coming into the classroom having watched videos, having, learned through social media, learning through gaming. That's a very big factor children and students are coming into classrooms with. And it's interesting, I was talking to one of our program heads the other day about one of our campuses, and in an attempt to modernize it, the IT lab was dismantled. And that's because you're not going to computers. Computers have to follow students where they are. That's how critical they are now. So I think it's very important to keep this in mind when we're designing programs, when we're catering to students, because students today with this background, they don't want passive learning. They want to go into classrooms where there's a ton of engagement and where they're immersed in their learning.
Yes, we were just talking about that yesterday. There was a panel discussion, and one of our panelists is a biologist, and he was saying that how very soon students will not need to dissect a frog physically because they'll have all the coding and all the DNA sequenced on their computers. So the world is changing, and in that changing, Susie, I would like to ask you a couple of things with PBL in mind. And for PBL is project-based learning, for those of you who don't know, although I'm sure by now everybody does. Just before we started this panel, Risham and I were talking, and we were talking about how PBL seems like it's something for the future, but it's been happening for decades. And we were just wondering why it's not more mainstream. Why is everybody not going the route of PBL? And then just as a follow-up also, does PBL need to evolve as the environments are changing? Is there room in PBL to evolve as well?
So thanks for the invitation to be part of this conversation. It's very invigorating. And as you pointed out, project-based learning is not a new idea. I mean, we've been learning by doing, for centuries as humans. And as a pedagogy, project-based learning goes back, decades. And if we look at the origins, we had inspiration from people like John Dewey more than 100 years ago. But if we look at the origins, it came from medical schools where doctors were finishing their studies, being able to recite chapter and verse from textbooks. But when they encountered real patients, they didn't know what to do with them because they hadn't done any work with real patients. And so that informed this whole approach to creating real world challenges, sometimes simulations, but more and more authentic challenges for students to be part of. Why has it taken so long if it makes so much great sense for learners? That's a tough question, one I grapple with as I work with school systems around the world. Part of it is teachers naturally teach the way they were taught, and most of them were not taught in a project-based way. Schools of education have been slow to embrace this as a pedagogy that we can teach. It's not easy. It requires a big shift in the teaching role from being, as you were just hearing from Roseanne, the keeper of information to the facilitator of learning. That's a huge shift for many teachers. And they need some examples, they need some support, they need encouragement, they need coaching, they need resources, they need models. All of those things are more and more readily available, but it does take time. It's kind of like turning that big ship of education. Takes slow to turn. But I'm encouraged by the momentum for project-based learning. I first encountered Beaconhouse more than a decade ago at a conference, an education conference in South Asia, and was excited to hear how PBL was taking hold there. And I'm seeing similar initiatives in many countries around the world, that I've worked with, but it is a slow evolution for teachers to understand how their role is changing. Once they have the support, once they have a taste of this, there's really no holding teachers back. Again and again, I hear from them that this is why I wanted to go into teaching. Now I get to know my students better. Now I get to have really engaging experiences with them where they're driving more of their learning and I'm guiding them through the process. So I'm encouraged. It is continuing to evolve. When we began working around PBL, I've been doing this for 20 years, and back then, technology was not so readily available. So now we have technology in everyone's hands. There's opportunities to create and communicate and collaborate and do all the things that project-based learning really requires to be done well. So all of those accessibility issues are better than they ever have been. But, again, that means new challenges for helping ensure that students are information literate, that they are using technology responsibly, and that they have opportunities to connect with issues that really matter to them. So it's a bit of a long answer to your question, but I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Susie, just one more thing I wanted to ask. So we just recently globally went through a pandemic, and it was a disruption to education. A lot of teachers found it very challenging to teach through PBL, to the PBL approach, especially to early years and primary years students via, Skype or Google or whatever they were using, technology. Do you think that there is space for project-based learning in this future world where we are going to be using a lot of technologies? And, considering where the environment is right now, there might be virtual classrooms. Again, can we actually practice PBL in those situations?
I think we can be encouraged and inspired by how we're seeing the workplace change outside of school. We know that in many places around the world, the people who left their workplaces and began working remotely are not rushing to go back to their offices and commute in traffic, and that a lot of the important work that's happening in the world is happening through virtual collaboration. Now, during the pandemic, students who had remote learning experiences that were very traditional and very rote workshop, worksheet type learning, memorization and regurgitation of information, they naturally disengaged. They were not excited about that. And we saw student engagement drop. We saw students turning their cameras off and kind of tuning out of online lessons in a lot of cases. And we saw parents getting this window into learning. And they kind of wondered, is this what school is like for our kids? No wonder they come home kind of bored and complaining. So the teachers who were bold about using technology in different ways to have students continue to collaborate, to continue to learn across disciplines and bring ideas together, to find ways to connect students with experts beyond that virtual classroom. We saw greater engagement in those situations and opportunities for students to realize, I can actually work with people in interesting ways online. Of course, we all want kids to have the social experience of being together physically. So I think that, there's great relief as kids have been able to return to their campuses. And, we all know we get to know our students better when we see them face to face. But I think we learned a lot about what can be accomplished virtually through collaborative learning. And I think that's something we're going to need to continue doing and get better at.
Kasim has a follow-up question. Kasim?
Hi, Susie. Just a quick question. I do agree with you that the role of teachers is absolutely essential to make project-based learning successful. My question is that we also tell teachers that PBL must be child-led. So that meaning that the teacher should not decide herself that, okay, this is the project that we're going to work on, but it should emerge from the interest of kids. Now, how do you make that happen in reality?
That's right. That's one of those million-dollar questions, right? And I think there's a difference between child-led and just complete open-ended discovery by children. The role of the teacher in project-based learning is as facilitator. but the teacher doesn't stop being the person who sparks interest in students, who guides them to areas of interest that they might not have known were going to be so fascinating, or helps them understand problems that are worth tackling that they can learn by working on together. So knowing your students, knowing their interests, connecting the learning experience to things that your students will find engaging, that's the teacher's role. It doesn't mean that you can only do projects that a 6-year-old imagines, because a 6-year-old hasn't imagined all of the learning experiences that are possible yet. They need and benefit from a teacher's guidance along the way. But if you have that combination of listening to your students, welcoming their questions, really embracing their curiosity, and then doing the wonderful work of an educator of taking that spark of curiosity and shaping that into a learning experience that builds in a developmentally appropriate way, that takes into account the different learning histories that your students have, helps them all advance kind of at their own rate of growth, help them set goals and reach those. So it's a combination of really tuning into your students, but also not forgetting the role that the teacher plays in designing learning experiences and guiding students through those experiences to achieve success.
Susie, I was smiling while you were talking because Kasim
Thank
and
you.
I have been arguing about this for, I think, 10 years now. I've been trying to explain to him that we pretend that it's student-led, but we do a lot of back-end planning because it is required. The students don't know. Risham, I think that you wanted to make a comment as well.
I do. I think that, this is such a relevant question, because I think, as Susie said, I mean, we have all these wonderful ideas, but for the teachers who have to suddenly make a change, not just, these are schools that they not only didn't experience as students, but especially in a place like Pakistan, but really even worldwide, there's not enough of it happening for them to get to learn from each other as yet. Yeah. And so, some of the qualities, I mean, I think teacher role is now kind of called a facilitator. So the qualities of a facilitator include listening carefully, creating opportunities for students to work in their own way, opportunities for students to speak, arranging materials so students can have conversations, encouraging persistence, acknowledging a student's perspective. Now, these are all wonderful ideas, but when you actually, try to do them in a classroom, it's not quite so perfect. I remember when I was younger, my cousins would always say, every time you walk into the room and say, I have a plan, we all run out. And now my teachers all say the same thing, that every time you come into the meeting room and say, I have these great ideas, we want to run away because we have to implement them. And it's a reality. I mean, it's a tough, it's very daunting, but I think that one of the really amazing things that happened during the pandemic, the pandemic was a truly global event, and as much as it isolated us individually, we connected on a global scale. And I work with a number of teachers who, through both their own initiative as well as initiatives led by the school, were able to do a lot of online learning. They used ed tech because at the end of the day, they're having to do in-service training, right? And so they can't, and the resources, being in a developing country, are limited. We don't have the supports that you might have somewhere else. And so this was a really great opportunity for them to connect to other educators online. There's some wonderful programs, whether it's Coursera, whether it's through LinkedIn. LUMS has started a ILMX. I mean, there's so many. Yeah. I can't even name them all. But it gave teachers the opportunity not just to learn new methodologies, to actually bring this theory into reality, but also speak to other educators around the globe and kind of, run these ideas off of them. Well, these are the problems we're facing, whatever, how do you handle it? How does it look like in a classroom? So really having mentors. And as we know, mentors are very essential for teachers,
Yep.
especially for teacher retention. So I think that EdTech has really enabled us to kind of
Connect globally.
take professional development to the next level.
And on that note, the student is here. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. I do understand that you had some blockages on the way here. We are not a traditional conference, so we're not going to make you stand in the corner or punish you or anything. I think you've been quiet for a while, so I wanted to ask you and bring you into this conversation. You're a 21st century learner.
Yeah.
Yeah? How do you think you learn differently?
Okay, so what I have seen is seeing my parents, like my parents are both doctors.
Okay.
So they have become doctors. Like they had
Can
the
you move closer to the mic? Yeah.
Okay. So my parents are both doctors, right? And since they have become doctors, they have like put a break on their learning. So I see the difference in us, the 21st century learners, is that we are somewhat of lifelong learners. We never stop learning. And even though I'm doing the IBDP, I may have 6 subjects, there may be different subjects, but on the side, I may be doing different stuff. So I won't call it multitasking, but we do more stuff at once. And we like to do, we like to
Better
sign up for more than,
multitaskers, you're saying.
yeah. Multitasking is not really effective, so I don't want to say that. Yeah.
Okay.
So
But
we
you have a
like
lot
to-
of projects going on at the same
Yeah,
time
so we
as
like
a DP
to,
student.
to
I
sign up for
understand.
more things that we can actually do, so that we can find out what we can do actually.
And how do you think in the future, so you're one generation, how do you think in the future students will learn?
So like currently, we have seen like in the pandemic, we shifted to online learning. And VR and AR, the technologies, we can call them XR, mixed reality as well, they have been around for like 6 years. But in Pakistan, we haven't really seen them being applied. It's also a cost factor because that technology is really expensive right now. And the other thing that Susie mentioned is the role of the teachers is still here. Like the technology is there. Like we saw in the pandemic, that technology is still there, but it's only the role of the teacher. The teacher has to implement the technology, and when the teacher starts using the technology, he or she inculcates that technology into the learning of the students. And when the teacher uses some sort of technology, like a teacher starts using Zoom or Teams, for example, the students will obviously start to use that. And if our teachers can cope up with the pace of us, then that would be really effective. And as I said, AR and VR, they can help a lot in bringing abstract concepts to life. For example, when we study history, we can't really relate to it.
Right.
But like, we live in Lahore, but we never feel what happened on these streets back then. So like, wearing an AR headset, we can see what was happening, and as we've seen in researches, personal experience helps in making our memories more stark. Yeah.
So basically, Ryan is challenging all teachers to keep up with him. All right? So teachers, that's a message to you. Kasim, did you want to ask something? Okay. Roseanne, I'd like to come to you now. I wanted to ask you, what will the school of the future look like?
Good question. I think that first of all, some of the other speakers already mentioned a little bit the necessity of the school of the future. The necessity of the school of the future would be an environment where, one, the teacher can actually be a facilitator and not a, now a bit harsh, but dictator, and where the students, in a way, can discover, yeah, and can interact and can be active parts of the learning. So I think that the main difference in between the way we have seen schools so far is that we thought of schools as a kind of a, very functional and also ready-made kind of solution to what we called learning. Now today, a school, and that also means tomorrow, the school should be a kind of a training facility, one can say, for learners and the teachers, because the teachers also become part of the learning process. And this is the big difference, I think, both in the way the school of the future, or actually I don't like so much talking about the school of the future, because I think that actually schools create the future because they create future citizens. And I don't think I can predict the future, but as we actually already been talking about, I think there's one thing that is certain for this future, that we do know that students in the future, as the World Economic Forum also says, that they will have this, job that probably doesn't exist. They actually mention a number: 65% of all students in primary will have a job that doesn't exist today. So ergo, they need to learn how to learn, as we just spoke about. So the future is not like kind of a solution. The future school, but actually also the school today, should provide for this interactive facility that allows us to learn how to learn, that allows us to develop all the skills we just mentioned, like creativity, interaction, taking initiatives, being agile. And also, this is again another thing, this kind of skills, you don't learn them because somebody tells them to you, or because you read about them. They're all skills that you develop in a process of interaction with other students and other learners, interaction with society, interaction, also digital interaction, and physical interaction, because you simply interact with the physical environment. Now, as an architect, you also have the beauty that we think very much about, how do we actually feel and react on, our kind of how our physical body interacts with this physical environment that surrounds us. How can you stimulate, for example, processes of collaboration, etc., etc. So the school we have designed and are about to create together with Kasim, which is very exciting, has all these elements built into it. It's a school that, we have been thinking about. We actually based it on Reggio Emilia and then transferred that in a way into a physical environment, also facilitating things not only because normally Reggio Emilia is very much focused on younger students, and we took the good parts of it and tried to kind of, catapult it into also facilitating things for older students. In that sense, that they can continue this hands-on approach according to their learning, which of course will have a very different perspective when you're older, so when you start experimenting. So you have this whole idea with what we call the ateliers, where you can, discover about the planet, you can discover about, you as a person, you discover things about science, etc. So this whole idea of the school as a sort of a, I would call it like a boxes where you sit and then you receive, has been turned around, and it becomes this facility where it's like, oh wow, I'm going to be there and I can interact, I can discover, I can work together. And also very important, facilitating what we call hybrid learning, which it doesn't mean what we're doing right now, that I'm on a digital connection, but that you become one with the learning you have in a place and the learning you have in a digital realm. So in a way, kind of combining the worlds, which is also, I think, very important for younger people, that they don't feel that they're like two separate worlds, but they're actually one. We live only one world. Well, that's shortly about the school of the future.
Thank you, Rosen. I think Kasim has a follow-up question.
Yeah, so Roseanne, thanks for that. Just in more concrete terms, so the school that we are developing together with you, I often tell people, and I mentioned earlier on also, that it is a school without classrooms. And that, of course, teachers in particular find most perplexing. So I was just wondering, can you just explain that? When we say a school without classrooms, or we say learning communities, like what would it physically look like or feel like?
For the audience, I'm privy to some of Rosen's vision. And Rosen, I think one of the things we talked about in the presentation was also your vision for watering holes, caves, mountaintops. Can you just talk about that? I think that's what Kasim is saying, and that's a good way to explain it to the audience and people listening at home.
Good. Yes. Let me explain. I think that you know, if I would be possible to, if it would be possible to me to predict, the biggest nightmare for most teachers, I would say no classrooms, and then they're like awake all night. But this is okay. This is a joke in between us. The fact is that it's not no classrooms doesn't mean no walls, and I think this is the biggest difference, you know, and the fair idea that you have this like huge open environments, and then people just, you know, by the sheer idea of the noise, they already get stressed by the idea about it, and they just get also how to say it, feel anguish because they don't know how can I take responsibility for the learning of my students. This is basically, and we fully understand this and we acknowledge this. So this is the first thing I think we have to realize, that when we talk about this like concept of no classrooms, it's not that we do, actually the opposite. We as architects really talk to teachers and talk with them about how can you actually enhance the learning of your students. So that is very important to understand. Now the second part is, in order to do so, we differentiate the physical environment. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have rooms. It just means that you have a lot of differentiated spaces and spatialities. When I say spatialities, I mean different types of spaces. And that means that we actually allow both the teacher and the student to discover and to try out different spaces and to use these different spaces and facilities of the spaces in order to enhance their learning. Now, the principles you refer to, I mean, there are two things I think to describe a little bit, you know, the new school of TNS. First of all, you know, we work with something we call the spiral of growth. The spiral of growth refers to that children, in order to accelerate their own learner, should always, you know, should never have something that blocks their, you know, learning. So they can actually react on their own natural born curiosity and, you know, continue their learning sequence, and there's nothing stopping them if they want to advance. Yeah. So this is a little bit a school that doesn't put anything in the way for you to learn. You don't have to wait for the others. If you want to continue, you can continue. And it's kind of, so in that sense, things are more connected and interconnected. Now, second to it, therefore, we also gradually create, in a way, what we call, you know, a gradually, you know, kind of bigger and bigger area of movement for students the older they get. Meaning that, for example, the youngest ones, you know, they still have very safe bases, but the older they get, the bigger an area they can cover and the more they can move around and experiment freely. Now, on the base of that, in order to structure it and to give it some kind of system, we have developed over the time 6 principles. We call them learning principles, but in a way, they are a combination of pedagogies, the ways we learn, and the spaces that provide these situations for learning. And then, of course, there are lots of variations in between them. And there's 6. So the first one we call, for example, the cave. And cave, that refers to concentration and focus. And cave spaces are places where you really truly can focus on what you're doing. Now, this can be a little space you can be alone in, or it can be, you know, sometimes we make like little pots you can hide in. It can also be, for example, a path you can walk. I mean, in TNS, we have a garden on the roof, and you can take a little walk because sometimes walking actually helps you focus. Then we have another one we call the mountaintop. Mountaintop situations, they are about, you know, when you're actually sitting in a group and somebody talks to you. This is the brief. This is a short talk of information. This can be physically, can also be digitally. They're what we call it one-way directional communication, meaning one person talks to you, or it can also be TED Talk you watch online. But, you know, you receive something, you listen attentively, and it gives you some inspiration. Now, these situations usually should not be like super long because then you can't focus anymore, but you have to have them. And then physically, they have to provide for a context that allows you to dedicate yourself to be fully focused on this activity. Then we have the third one we call the campfire. Campfire is about teamwork, collaborative work. This can be, you know, a situation where you actually really, you know, a little group of people, you can be a round table. But round tables, if you have like 20 round tables in the space, like a little bit the images you see behind me, you know, there's not much focus on this group. So for us, campfire is about doing teamwork, but also taking responsibility for the team. So we create like spaces inside the space. We create a lot of different things. I mean, if you want, I can share you some photos, but otherwise I can just explain it verbally. So this is about creating different spaces of collaboration and making students and teachers, try and experiment with it. Then the fourth one we call hands-on, and hands-on education is about actually doing it and then learning while you interact with it physically. This can also be that you build a model to understand a mathematical, formula. It's not only related to arts or science, it can also be other things. And then we have the fifth principle we call the watering hole. Watering hole is about actually one could say informal knowledge exchange. This is the moment where you suddenly hear something because somebody says it. This is where you get inspired because you see others do something which you get inspired by. So these are typically all the spaces and moments in between, that link the different spaces. In the TNS, we have a huge spiral, actually, that connects the whole school and where the spaces spill out into. This is like a huge watering hole where you can get inspired. And then the last one we call movement. Now, the last principle, movement, is very difficult often for teachers and for schools to relate to, because for us, movement is not just about doing sports. Movement is actually about activating your body with the single goal of enhancing, for example, your learning potential, your concentration. We know that when you sit still for a long time, your brain activity simply go down. And we also know that this is individual different. So we like to create schools where children learn slowly, bit by bit during the years, to take responsibility for this themselves. So they can, for example, run out and for a second and then come back because they just simply can't focus anymore because they can't sit still anymore any longer with whatever they're doing. So we're trying to kind of create this auto-regulation, if you want, and to learn this auto-regulation, by providing possibilities when you can step in and out and move. Now, this is often difficult for schools because we have been traditionally controlling actually the movement of students. We've told them to sit still, to stay here, etc., etc. And it also relates a little bit to another thing that teachers find difficult, the fact that they can't see their students, so they can't control whether they're really doing what they, according to the teacher, are supposed to do. So this element of trust, Now, this is where I will finish now my description. The truth is that to describe this new school of TNS, I need a lot more time because we also inspired it.
Yes.
We got very inspired by the landscape of Pakistan. So when you go up on the spiral of growth, you go into these different learning landscapes with a lot of fantastic colors and materials and different things. So it's actually going to be a very beautiful school. But to finish with the thing of trust, this is just also something I've always wondered about, because I think this is the core of creating a future, if you want, learning environment, is that we actually trust our students that they want to learn. Our typical school architecture is based on the opposite. It's based on control. But the fact is that a human being, when you get born, you are, born with a natural born curiosity. You want to learn. And when we don't learn and when we don't grow and when we don't develop as human beings, we actually get very stressed and depressed and sad. So this element of trust should be built into our schools, into our culture of schools, in our culture of learning, and also in our culture, to the teachers. This whole element of trust is, for me, is the core of a future school.
Thank you.
And this is where I will offer.
Thank you, Rosen. I hate to interrupt you, but we are running short of time. I had a lot of follow-up questions from all of you, and I could talk all day, but we do have some audience questions. So I'd like to go to the audience at this point. Is there anybody here physically who has any questions for us? There are. Yeah, I can't see them. All right. So one question that I have here is, how might we design learning experiences that foster learning in a variety of spaces and places? How might we design learning experiences, and how might we design experiences where students spearhead their own learning? Susie, would you like to take this?
Of course. Thanks for the question. So I heard the phrase spaces and places. And it makes me think that one of the big shifts in education is for us to stop separating school from the world around school. One of the places students learn is in their community. And I think we can design learning experiences that bring the community into the school by bringing in outside experts or focus groups or people who have could be potential clients for something that students will develop, and thinking about opportunities to take students out of the campus to be observers, to interact, with their community, to be problem solvers. So I think thinking about more broadly about where and when and how does learning take place, starting with really interesting problems that might exist outside the campus, and how can our students engage with those issues in ways that are safe and facilitated and developmentally appropriate, but still give them that interaction, with the world that they're just hungry to interact with, from what I can tell. So I think that's one of the things we can think about is opening up those windows and those taking down not just the walls of the classroom, as you were hearing about in this kind of new design of a school, which is so exciting, but thinking beyond the campus itself as opportunities for learning.
Thank you, Susie. There is another question, and I think this is for Ryan. Ryan, how do you want to be assessed on all this knowledge in the 21st century?
Yeah. So with everything, like me
Can you be a little closer to the, yeah, thank you.
Me personally, I've always wanted to go paperless. So I started the IBDP last year, and I started with only a tablet. So like every class I would go to, like we have 6 subjects. So two of my teachers wanted me to like switch to paper, but like the others were fine with it. But now that I'm in the second year, it's like I have to switch to paper because my real examination is going to be on paper. So this thing of like the assessment, it belongs to like the IB to change, and there needs to be a systematic change, because I personally believe that we work the whole year, but like the exam is only 1 hour, 1.5 hours, 2.5 hours. But I personally believe, and we all know that particular time period cannot assess us based on our whole year of learning. We learn a lot of things the whole year. So there needs to be a systematic change in this, and what I think should be done is throughout the year, there should be some assessment, because like if there's no assessment at all, there's no motivation to study. Motivation is also somewhat linked to grades and stuff. And we just need to move away from these annual examinations and move towards more, we should also move towards more practical examinations, and the examinations should not really feel like examinations. So like the teacher knows that it's an exam, but the students should not know. So what the students have learned, it will come out intrinsically, and the teacher would know.
So you heard it here first, students want more assessments, is that right? All right, so I have one more question, and I think unless anybody in the audience has more questions, I have one last question here with me. And I think this is for Kasim. It says, can we have PBL and more technology in more of our schools, like franchise-owned schools by BSS?
So project-based learning may have started at TNS in 2007, but over the last 15 years, we've successfully introduced it at a number of Beaconhouse schools across Pakistan. By the franchised bit, I assume that the reference is to the educators. The biggest challenge with project-based learning is not necessarily any physical resources or any fancy equipment or technology. It's basically teachers, which I think Susie spoke of also, because teachers need to completely unlearn the way in which, because we all were taught in a certain way, so it's natural that we would teach in the same way. So that is, I think, the biggest challenge on an ongoing basis, like to find teachers who are willing to adopt project-based learning, because it is easier said than done, but of course highly rewarding. But yes, I think if the reference is to the educators, then it's a conversation certainly that, we can have. I saw somebody from the educators in the hall earlier. I think he's left now. I just have, since Aisha, you said that was the last question.
That is the last question.
So I just have a question or a thought for us to ponder, Ryan, perhaps for yourself. So when we say, I know that in our minds, assessment has just become another word for examination. So you spoke about tablets, computers, e-assessments, paper, and yes, you also spoke about smaller assessments throughout the year, as opposed to one summative assessment at the end of the year. And I completely agree with you. But I'm just wondering that our examinations or some kind of testing, is that the only kind of assessment? Can you think of anything else?
Yeah, that's what I said at the end, that we need to move away from, I couldn't think of the word back then, that we think of examinations, assessment as only tests. So what I said was, we should come up with assessments that don't feel like tests. So the teacher knows that this is an assessment, she goes into the class and she carries out the class, and at the end she comes out with the result. The students didn't know. We need to come up with something like this.
Well done. Thank you so much. And on that note, unfortunately, we are out of time. What some of the takeaways, audience, that I feel is that we are supposed to create flexible learning spaces, but not just for students. We need to create those flexible learning spaces for teachers as well, because we are working in partnership. Students are working in partnership now. Your environment is your third teacher. So don't worry about creating fancy environments. Just make sure that they cater to the students' needs. You can do these with very little resources, but just a lot of thinking. A lot of planning does go into PBL. So think about those things. Think about how your students want to be assessed. Think about how often they want to be assessed. Look at how you want to interact with your environment. These are all things that we can talk about, and I would really appreciate if after this session you can send us questions and give us feedback on this session. If you have any follow-up questions, and I do know that there were some, we're happy to answer them offline at some other time. So on behalf of Beaconhouse, I do thank Susie Boss, Rosen Bosch, Risham Najam, Ryan, Khalid, and Kasim, along with our audience and for participating in this edition of Guardians of the Future. Like I said, you will receive an email. Please do give us your feedback. And also, please do visit our immersive art exhibit, which is going on right now. It's Coexist and Co-Exit, and our classrooms of tomorrow, which are also displayed outside. We would also like to thank our lead sponsor, UBL, for their continued support, as well as all other sponsors, without whom it would not be possible for us to bring SOT to you. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.